Chapter 1: The Weight of Empty Stomachs. The last child to die in Clan Duskfang had been named Gorak. He was 4 years old, small even by Orc standards, with ears too large for his head and a laugh that sounded like gravel rolling downhill. Commander Morra Ashveil had held him at the end, when his body had finally stopped fighting the hunger that had hollowed him out over 3 slow months. She had not cried. Orcs do not cry, not because they cannot feel, but because tears have never filled a stomach. She buried him herself, in the ashen soil outside the clan's mountain encampment, and she pressed her forehead to the frozen ground for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to promise, short enough to stand back up. That was 6 days ago. Now she stood at the edge of the Greywood, 300 warriors behind her, staring at something she had spent weeks convincing herself did not frighten her. Lumenreach, the elven fortress, rose from the valley floor like an argument made of stone and arrogance. Its walls were pale as bone, 60 feet high and carved from a single vein of fossilized moon rock that the elves claimed could not be broken by mortal hands. Crystalline towers caught the morning light and scattered it in prismatic ribbons across the valley. Defensive arrays of woven thorn vine, ancient, magically accelerated, thick as a man's torso, snaked along the parapet in living coils. At every corner, elven archers stood in silence, their longbows already drawn, already waiting. The fortress protected something the elves considered trivial, their surplus grain stores. 3 seasons of elven harvest excess, hoarded in underground silos while Clan Duskfang had watched its elderly give their portions to the young, and then watched the young die anyway. Morra adjusted the iron pauldron on her left shoulder. It had belonged to her father, who had been a diplomat. He'd believed in words. He traveled to Lumenreach once, presented Clan Duskfang's situation with maps and mortality records and formal requests written in the elven script he'd spent 2 years learning. They had returned his delegation with a politely worded refusal and a small bag of decorative seeds. Ornamental, inedible. Her father had not survived the next winter. Commander, her second, a barrel-wide orc named Dreg, moved to her side. He smelled like smoke and iron filings. His left eye was a milky, scarred ruin from a battle she hadn't been present for. Scouts confirm the eastern gate is the only entry point. 2-foot steel, rune-locked. The western face is sheer cliff. The northern approach is the thornfield. They've been growing it for 2 centuries. Even if we burned it, the smoke would kill us before the fire reached the gate. I know, Morra said. And the walls. I know, Dreg. He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, the warriors are asking what the plan is. Morra turned away from the fortress and looked at her people. 300 faces. Gaunt cheeks on warriors who had once been terrifying. Armor that hung loose. Eyes that were determined, not because they believed they would win, but because believing in anything else meant accepting that Gorak had died for nothing. Tell them, she said, that we're going to do something the elves have never planned for. Dreg waited. Tell them we're going to go under it. Chapter 2. What Lives in the Dark. The idea had not come from strategy. It had come from desperation, which Morra had learned was often the same thing wearing different armor. Orcs were mountain people, not in the poetic sense that elves were forest people, all grace and communion with nature. Orcs were mountain people in the practical sense. They dug. They always had. Tunnels for shelter. Tunnels for storage. Tunnels for escape routes when larger armies came hunting. The Duskfang clan had 3 generations of tunnelers among them, people who could red rock the way sailors red water, the subtle shifts in density, the direction of underground streams, the way certain stones carried sound from 100 feet away. Morra had spent 3 weeks with her oldest tunneler, a 70-year-old woman named Pell, who had more rock dust in her lungs than air, and still somehow refused to die. You want to go under Moonrock, Pell had said, her voice like a door with a broken hinge. The walls are Moonrock. The foundation is granite. Pell had stared at her for a long time. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else. It'll take 12 days, minimum, and we'll be close enough to their walls that if they have any kind of vibration detection, they do. I know. That's why we won't dig in a straight line. Another long stare. Then Pell had smiled, which was not a comforting sight. Your father was smarter with words, but you might be smarter with everything else. The tunnel had taken 11 days and 4 hours. They had dug in a long, curving arc, never approaching the fortress walls directly, always at an angle, always changing depth, always stopping for 30-minute intervals when Pell pressed her ear to the earth and listened for the elven sensors. 3 times she'd waved them to complete silence. 3 times they'd crouched in the dark for 40 minutes without breathing harder than sleeping children. Now Morra stood at the tunnel's terminus. A small chamber, hand-carved, braced with timber from the Greywood that they dragged in piece by piece. 12 feet above her head, according to Pell's measurements, was the floor of the Lumenreach grain silos. 12 feet of granite. And on the other side of those silos, enough food to feed Clan Duskfang for 2 winters. "We break through in sections," Morra said to the dozen warriors crammed into the chamber with her. Their faces were pale with tunnel dust, streaked with sweat, lit by a single hooded lantern. Pell opens the first hole, just wide enough to get a look. "We confirm silo placement, we identify guards, and we move in teams of 4. No battle cries, no war drums. We are ghosts." She paused. "We are not here to kill elves." Silence. "I know what you're thinking," she said, "but hear me. If we slaughter our way through this fortress, every elven nation on this continent will have justification to hunt us into extinction. We take the grain. We take enough to survive. We leave." Another pause, harder this time. "Anyone who cannot follow this order stays in the tunnel." No one moved. No one spoke. Dreg, somehow having squeezed his enormous frame into the chamber behind her, gave a single slow nod. Pell pressed her ear to the ceiling, listened for 15 seconds, then held up 3 fingers. 3 seconds later, she brought them down one at a time. On 0, she drove her chisel into the rock. Chapter 3, What the Elves Were Not Told. Here is something the fortress records of Lumenreach would never admit. The walls had been built by 3 architects. 2 of them were elven masters. The third had been a human engineer from the lowland cities, brought in because elven tradition had no framework for dealing with orc tunnel tactics. He had submitted a report. The report recommended deep foundation monitoring, seismic sensors on the eastern and southern quadrants, and a re-examination of the northern granite bedrock, which, he noted, contained a natural geological fault that could be exploited by a sufficiently determined excavation team. The Elven Council had thanked him politely, paid him generously, and filed the report in a cabinet that no one had opened in 40 years. Captain Sylara Dawnveil had never read that report. She was 23 years old in human terms, which made her an infant by elven standards, and she had been assigned the night watch of the grain district because her superior, Commander Vane, believed grain duty was where you sent officers you didn't fully trust yet. Sylara found this insulting. She also found it boring. She was walking the silo corridor, a long, vaulted hall with 4 massive storage chambers on each side, when she heard something she couldn't immediately explain. Not a sound, exactly. A change in the silence. She stopped walking, tilted her head. The fortress at night had its own sonic signature. The wind off the parapets, the occasional shift of the thorn vine, the distant murmur of the duty guard at the eastern gate. She had memorized it without trying to. This was new. A very faint rhythmic pressure, almost like a heartbeat, except it was coming from the floor. Sylara knelt, pressed her palm flat against the stone. There. She was running before the thought had fully formed. Chapter 4, 12 feet. Pell broke through in 4 minutes. The hole was the size of a fist. Morra put her eye to it and saw the silo interior. Grain mounded in enormous piles, the smell of it rushing down through the breach like something sacred. Her stomach contracted so violently she nearly made a sound. "Clear," Dreg whispered. "Clear." She pulled back. "Widen it. Quick as Pell can go." They had planned for 8 minutes to widen the breach to entry size. They got 4. The alarm was not a sound. It was a light, an elven warning system, strips of luminescent crystal embedded in the silo walls that blazed sudden white when triggered by the duty commander. "Go," Morra said. Not a whisper now. "Go." The hole was not wide enough. She went through anyway, scraping both shoulders, dropping into the grain silo in a cascade of dust and rubble. Behind her she heard Dreg cursing in a breathless undertone as he forced himself through the gap like a cork being pushed backward through a bottleneck. Around them, grain poured through the breach in a golden waterfall. They had 12 minutes. That was the estimate time from alarm trigger to armed elven response force reaching the grain district. 12 minutes to load as much as they could carry, get it back through the tunnel, and collapse the entry point behind them. Morra had 30 warriors now in the silo. Each one carried a pack designed to hold 60 pounds of grain. Clan Duskfang had made the packs themselves, over 4 months, out of every spare piece of fabric they owned. "Fill and move," she ordered. "Fill and move." They filled, and then the doors opened. Chapter 5. Her name was Sylara. She was younger than Morra expected. That was the first thing. The elven captain who burst through the silo doors with 8 guards behind her was young. Her silver hair unbound, her armor fastened wrong on the left side where she'd clearly dressed in a hurry. Her longbow was up, arrow knocked, and her eyes swept the silo with the quick, professional assessment of someone who had trained for this even if she'd never expected it. She saw 30 orcs. She saw the grain pouring through the hole in the floor. She saw Commander Morra Ashveil standing at the center of it all, and she did not fire. "Stop," Sylara said. Her voice was steadier than her hands. "Drop what you're carrying." Morra did not drop what she was carrying. She held 40 pounds of grain in a pack across her chest, and she looked at the elven captain, and she made a decision she hadn't known she was going to make until the moment she made it. She spoke in Elven. "We are not here to fight you," she said. Her accent was brutal. She taught herself from a stolen grammar text over 3 winters. "We are here because our children are dying." Sylara Dawnveil's arrow did not lower, but something changed in her face. "Orcs don't speak Elven," she said. "Orcs do whatever it takes," Morra said. "How many of you have children, Captain?" A heartbeat. Then, "Lower the..." "How many?" Silence. And then one of the elven guards, older, a veteran, his bow arm steady, said quietly, "Captain, their tunnel work. They've been planning this for months." "I know," Sylara said. "That's not a raid," the guard said. "Raiders don't dig for 3 weeks. Raiders don't bring grain packs." Morra watched something move through Sylara's expression like weather crossing a plane. The arrow stayed knocked, but the arm dropped 2 degrees. "You have 1 minute," Sylara said finally, very quietly, so her own guards almost couldn't hear. "1 minute before my commander arrives with 40 soldiers. And I will tell him the alarm was a false reading." She swallowed. "Take what you can carry. Leave through the floor. And if you ever come back..." "We won't," Morra said. "You have my word as clan commander." "Orc words are the only currency I have left," Morra said. "And I don't spend what I can't back." The minute was the longest of Morra's life. Warriors moved in disciplined silence, packs heavy on their backs, dropping one by one through the breach. Dreg went third to last, barely fitting, the grain floor shifting around him like a living thing. Morra watched Sylara the entire time. Watched the captain stand with her arrow knocked and her arm down and her jaw set in the expression of someone who had decided something they hadn't been authorized to decide. When only Morra remained, she said, "What is your name, Captain?" A long pause. "Sylara. Sylara." Morra committed it to memory the way she committed the shape of tunnels. Precisely, permanently. "There is a clan of 312 orcs in the Duskfang range. If your council asks whether we came from there, I'll say I don't know," Sylara said. "Because I don't." Officially, Morra picked up the last pack. She looked at the elven captain one final time, in the white blaze of the alarm crystals, in a fortress that had believed itself untouchable, in the ruins of a plan that had succeeded through the mercy of a young woman who could have ended it with a single arrow. "The report your council ignored," Morra said. "The human engineer. The northern granite fault." Sylara stiffened. "What about it?" "It mentioned a second fault. Eastern quadrant. You should tell your council." She paused. "Or don't. But you should know about it." Then she dropped through the floor. Chapter 6. The weight of what was carried back. The tunnel collapsed behind them on schedule. Pell had rigged a simple stonefall mechanism. A single beam pulled free, and they moved through the dark in a fast, silent line, 2 miles of careful darkness, until the tunnel mouth opened into the cold Greywood air and Morra came out gasping into a night that smelled of pine and frost and freedom. The warriors who had gone ahead were already there. Packs on the ground, some people already weeping. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the quiet and helpless way that bodies respond when something they feared might never happen has happened. Dreg was sitting on a fallen log with his head in his hands, and when he looked up his ruined eye was wet. Morra counted the hall. At 60 pounds per pack, 30 warriors, they had carried back approximately 1,800 pounds of grain. At proper rationing, stretched carefully, supplemented with whatever they could hunt and forage. 3 months. Maybe 4. Not enough to fix everything, but enough that no one would be buried until spring. Enough that the children would eat in the morning. She sat down on the frozen ground. She didn't realize how badly her hands were shaking until she tried to unlace her pack and couldn't. Dreg sat next to her. He didn't say anything, which was one of the things she valued most about him. After a moment she said, "She let us go." "I know," Dreg said. "I heard. Why do you think she did it?" Dreg was quiet for a long time. The Greywood settled around them. The sounds of warriors making camp. The crackle of a fire someone was too cold and tired to not light. "Maybe," he said slowly, "because she's young enough to still ask why the walls were built, instead of just trusting that they were." Morra thought about that. She thought about Gorak. She thought about her father, who had believed in words and died believing them. She thought about Sylara Dawnveil, standing in the alarm-white silo with an arrow she had every justification to release and a conscience that had turned out to be stronger than her orders. She thought about what it meant that the only bridge between their peoples had been built in the 12 seconds of a young elven captain deciding, alone in the middle of the night, that a dying clan was not an acceptable casualty of political indifference. "Dreg," she said, "Commander, send a runner to Elder Pell. I want a message prepared in formal elven script. No threat, no posturing. Just facts. Who we are, what we took, what we would have done if we'd been refused again." She paused. "And a request. For a meeting." Dreg turned to look at her fully. "The council will never agree to." "Not the council," Morra said. "Captain Sylara Dawnveil, Lumenreach Grain District, Night Watch." Dreg stared at her. Then he stood slowly, like a structure that had been under enormous weight for a very long time. "And if she doesn't respond? Then we figure out something else." Morra leaned her head back and looked up at the stars through the Greywood canopy. The same stars the elves saw from their parapets. The same stars that had watched Gorak be buried and watched the tunnel being dug and watched 30 orcs pour through a hole in the floor of an impenetrable fortress. "But she will." "How do you know?" "Because she asked my name," Morra said. "Before I dropped through the floor. I didn't notice until I was 20 feet down the tunnel." A pause. "She asked my name." Dreg was quiet for a moment. Then, "What did you tell her?" Morra smiled. "It was a small and complicated thing. I didn't have time, but she'll find out." She stood. The camp was settling, the fire burning low, warriors curled against each other for warmth with full packs for pillows. Somewhere near the tree lean, Pell was already asleep, propped against a root, snoring with an intensity that suggested she'd earned it. 3 months of grain. One elven captain with a conscience. A tunnel that had taken 11 days and 4 hours to dig and 30 seconds to seal. It wasn't peace. It wasn't even close to peace. But it was the first night in 6 months that Morra went to sleep without calculating how many days of food they had left. In Lumenreach, a report was filed the following morning. Captain Sylara Dawnveil noted a sensor malfunction in the northern grain silo. A minor structural anomaly in the silo floor, likely seismic, and recommended further geological survey of the Eastern Quadrant Foundation. She noted no security breach. She noted no missing grain. She did not note the name she had almost asked. She did not note that she had spent the rest of her watch sitting in the empty silo, hand pressed to the repaired stone floor, listening. She did not note that at the 3rd hour, just before dawn, she had heard something through the rock. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more. If Morra's tunnel took 11 days to dig, it took you considerably less time to read this far, and if you made it to Gorak's name in the preamble, you already know the story got under your skin a little. That's the point. If you want more stories like this, morally complex, emotionally unhinged, with characters who do the right thing for the wrong reasons and the wrong thing for the right ones, the subscribe button is right there. It costs nothing and it tells the algorithm that stories with actual weight are worth surfacing. Like the video if Sylara earned it. Subscribe if Morra did. And if you have a concept, a title, a single sentence that's been living in your head, drop it in the comments. The next story might come from you. The walls aren't impenetrable. Neither is writer's block. See you in the next one.